today to be a part of the unveiling of It Is Possible, Influencing Change in Nigeria. It is possible, influencing change in Nigeria. So if you look at the copy of the book, you will find that the I am is actually crossed out in red. So it's not impossible, it is possible, influencing change in Nigeria. Now, whether that is possible or not, we'll find out as we go along. And I must thank my brother Jude and his team for the very kind invitation to be here today. Jude has always been about big ideas and constantly pushing for bold and new approaches to addressing the challenges facing Africa and, of course, facing Nigeria. So I wasn't really surprised when he discussed the problem with smart people like Jude. They assume that everyone knows what they're talking about. But as a teacher of many years' experience, I started teaching in 1981. So if you calculate that, it has nothing to do with my age, but, I started teaching in 1981. I prefer, as a teacher, to be sure that we're all on the same page. And I've learned my lessons the hard way. I remember in my early years as a law teacher, I was taking tutorials in criminal law. And one of the concepts in determining liability in criminal law is the eggshell principle. The eggshell principle, as in eggs. The eggshell principle. And I want to explain this in a bit of detail, just so that you'll understand what I'm trying to say subsequently. So the principle is to the effect that if you hit a man on the head, or a woman on the head, with a ruler, a thin stick, even if it's a thin stick, and his head breaks into two, and he dies, you cannot say, I'm not liable because his head was too weak. The law takes the position that a man is entitled to carry his eggshell head around. And even if you hit it, even if it's softly, even if you hit it very lightly, and it breaks, you are still liable. This is the eggshell principle of liability in criminal law. Now, this is how it is properly explained. But then I asked my tutorial class once what the eggshell principle was. People kept quiet for a while, so I was a bit concerned. Then subsequently about 3 or so people raised their hands. One said, the eggshell principle is, if you are careless in a market and you throw something and it breaks somebody's eggs, you are liable. That's one. Another said, legal experts have discovered that almost everybody you see has a weak head called an eggshell head. Another, and this was the closest to what the eggshell principle is, he said there's a difference between raw egg and boiled egg. But you're liable if you break the head of someone whose head is like a raw egg. So from those early years, I learned not to take anything for granted and to make sure that you explain things well. So what is a primer? A primer, I looked it up, by the way, is a basic introductory text, a book or an article that tries to simplify or explain a particular subject. So this primer is a book, the one we're unveiling today, is a book which seeks to explain how to influence change in Nigeria. How, the hows and whys of influencing change in Nigeria. Now, I hope when I ask you at the end of this what a primer is, you're not going to tell me that has anything to do with premium times or anything such thing, because I'm going to ask. Permit me to tell a story about some policy and practical change that I've been involved in. And I'll speak of my experience with judicial reform in Lagos State when I served as Commissioner of Justice and Attorney General in the then civilian administration in Lagos State in 1999, in the administration of Governor Bola Tinubu, as he then was, now, as you know, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I cite this particular example because it is about 17 years old now. It went on from 1999 to 2007. So there's enough time to reflect, enough time to critique it properly and all that. There were two immediate challenges in 1999. The first was how to build a Ministry of Justice that was concerned with citizens' rights, the rule of law, and justice under a democratic constitution. This was important because we were coming out of years of military rule where the Ministry of Justice was more like a Ministry of Law and Order and enforcing decrees which sometimes violated civil liberties and fundamental rights. The second problem was reforming our administration of justice system, which was beset at this time with very long delays and judicial corruption. We decided that we had to implement a justice sector reform, and we engaged all possible stakeholders, especially civil society. We had also developed a reform blueprint before we were sworn in. We established a new department in the Ministry of Justice called the Citizens' Rights Department. Before then, we had DPP's Office, Director of Public Prosecutions, Civil Litigations, Drafting, etc. So we introduced a new department called the Citizens' Rights Department. We started something called the Office of the Public Defender under Citizens' Rights, offering free legal services for citizens who could not afford legal fees, a consumer protection unit, and a citizens mediation center. Now, there were several citizens mediation centers set up. Now, immediately after commissioners were sworn in, we conducted a survey of the perceptions of 200 lawyers who practiced in the high courts of Lagos State on the integrity of judges, their perception on the integrity of judges. 89% of the lawyers responded that judges in the state were, quote, notoriously corrupt. Notoriously corrupt. Yet, as of that date, and since the state was founded in 1967, no judge or even a magistrate had ever been reprimanded for corruption. None, since the inception of the state. And yet, lawyers who practiced in the state, 89% of them said judges were notoriously corrupt. So I called for a meeting of the 7 of the most senior judges under the auspices of the chief judge. The chief judge convened this meeting. At the meeting, I showed them the damning results of the survey and opened discussions on how to reverse the trend. We began with a discussion on their remuneration. They were earning at the time 67,000 naira a month. Now, 67,000 naira a month was not anything then. It was a small amount of money, but certainly not 67,000 naira today. They were earning, what was a very small amount of money. We then asked them, we asked ourselves in this discussion with the 7 judges, what their expenses were. So we took our pen and paper and we wrote it down. School fees for 3 children, 1 abroad, 2 in secondary school in Nigeria, 2 in 2 private schools. They had no medical insurance. They had no chance of building a home, even on retirement, especially for the amount of money they were earning. Now, these were men and women with the power of life and death. They could order the death of a convict or determine the lives and livelihoods of many. So it became obvious that there was no way that 67,000 naira could even scratch the surface. One of the judges, in fact at the time I think it was second most senior, tapped me on the shoulder and said, learned attorney, you know this exercise that you are doing is rubbish. You pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. Another told the story of a time when his daughter was seriously ill and was taken to a well-known private hospital as an emergency case. His wife called him to join her in the hospital, as the hospital had managed to stabilize the girl. They now demanded a deposit to admit her for further treatment. So when he arrived, he was asked to pay 17,000 naira, but he couldn't afford it. And he was there pleading with them to have his daughter admitted while he went to raise the cash and return. The hospital refused. As he pleaded, a man tapped him from behind and said, "Don't worry, sir, don't worry. We will take care of the bill, don't worry." So the relieved judge thanked the angel profusely. The money was paid and his daughter was admitted. On his way to his car, his clerk, who came with him, asked him if he knew the man who paid the bill. He said, "No, I've never met him before." The clerk told him that this was a particular litigant in a case before him. At the time, of course, he didn't know this, but he was relating this story to us to let us know that the person who actually paid the bill was somebody who had a case before him. So on the issue of remuneration of judges then, we then decided that we'll hire a good human resource expert company to work out what would constitute a living wage and other emoluments. We eventually agreed on a sum almost 5 times their earnings at the time. And then, quickly, when a judge is accused of corruption, there are one of 2 things you could do. You could bring it to the Judicial Service Commission, that's the State Judicial Service Commission. Now, if you do that, there's a lot of interference. You get calls from everybody. Calls from traditional rulers, from this and that. But we decided, in agreement with the judges, that we will send the complaint straight to the National Judicial Council. It will not stop at the Judicial Service Commission. We'll just send it straight. And they, of course, don't know anybody. They'll constitute a panel and then make a recommendation to us, which is exactly what we did. So we kept our word on remuneration and rigorously enforced appointments and discipline. 22 magistrates were sacked for corrupt practices, and 3 judges were also sacked before 2002. New judges under the new dispensation, about half the number of judges were appointed, 26 of them. These were all new judges. And this was about half the number of judges of the state. Many of them were young, some barely 35 years old at the time. And 2/3 of them were women. Now, at the time, we were criticized for appointing very young people. In fact, there was some commentator in the newspaper who said that we have appointed miniskirt-wearing eaglet judges. Fortunately, the ladies proved that they were smarter than the miniskirts or any such thing. The average age of judges dropped from 55 to 44. We also arranged for judges during their vacation to sit with judges in the Royal Courts of Justice in London to get a sense of how a long-established and reputed court system works. We introduced the multi-door courthouse system, which provided robust alternative dispute mechanism, and we also established, as I had said earlier, citizens mediation centers everywhere, where citizens resolve small claims mediated by trained mediators. And this substantially reduced the number of civil cases going before magistrates on the High Court. We fundamentally reviewed our civil procedural rules at the time to reduce the long delays in the judicial process. The Lagos State Judiciary, I think, experienced the beginnings of a transformation that went on in the following years and, to a very good extent, changed the nation's administration of justice system, especially regarding remuneration, appointment of judges, radical civil and criminal procedural reforms, and alternative dispute resolution. Many states adopted the Lagos model, especially the civil procedural rules. They also adopted the multi-door courthouse, including the Federal Capital Territory here. Several ministries of justice, including the Federal Ministry of Justice, established Citizens' Rights Department patterned along the Lagos lines. And finally, we wrote all these into a policy document which was endorsed by all the judges at a judicial retreat that we held in Ghana and approved by the Lagos State Executive Council. Now, what were the key elements of that change that took place? And what were the key elements that made whatever modest success we achieved possible? One was that we were clear that we wanted to achieve a certain objective, a reform of our administration of justice system. And we had a clear understanding of what the problems were and a firm commitment to do what was needed to address the problem. Second, we adopted a blueprint. We had a blueprint. And the blueprint was way before we were sworn in. And we followed it strictly. Thirdly, we built a strong partnership across civil society, media, academia, and other relevant government institutions. We understood that we needed a multi-pronged approach to tackle the problems. Different institutions and groups had unique roles to play, and we had to ensure that we benefited from all of them. We needed others. We simply couldn't do it alone. The fourth was that we built a strong narrative around the relevance of what we were trying to do. We needed the buy-in of the judiciary itself, including the Federal Attorney General, the then Minister of Justice, Chief Justice of Nigeria, and Supreme Court Justice, and the President of the Court of Appeal. All of them, we ensured that they attended our judicial reform summits, and we held about 4 or 5 of those summits. And at those summits, all our plans and ideas were robustly debated with our other partners. We had to find common ground of collaboration, since, of course, it was not possible to agree on everything. And fifth, we planned around sustaining the reform and the changes that we were putting in place, because we really thought it would be the wise thing, of course, is how will these changes endure beyond us. Finally, we were very hands-on, and I do not think that you can bring about any kind of change in Nigeria without being hands-on. Whoever is the CEO, whoever is the chief executive, must be absolutely hands-on. In this part of the world, the CEO is the CEO. Everybody else is an advisor. Everybody else is an advisor. And that is so whether it is the president or a governor or a commissioner or minister. Everybody is an advisor. We don't have a system of collective activity. If you are the CEO, you must be the CEO, because you're going to have to take all the decisions. I had meetings then with the Chief Judge of the state, as I said, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, the Federal Attorney General, regularly, because you have to get buy-in at every stage. You can't assume that everyone is happy with what you're doing. The constant consultation is important. In 2007, we conducted another survey. This was on advice of the World Bank at the time, that we should conduct yet another survey. And we ran this survey along with their own people. And in the High Court of Lagos, the report was, the result was the same integrity test, 200 lawyers, another set of 200 lawyers. At that time, the score was 0% corruption. So the question was, what's your perception of corruption in the High Court, not the Magistrate Court, the High Court? And we have 0% now. Now, what happened? It wasn't as though the people became born again or anything like that. It was more because, first, remuneration was substantial, and there was consequence for any kind of misdemeanor. And they saw the evidence of the consequence. As I said, 22 magistrates were sacked, 3 judges were also sacked. So there was no question at all that the state had the resolve to punish any form of criminality or any form of corruption. Now, there was, you would say that there was some measure of dramatic change. Of course, when you look at it, many of our efforts failed. Many of the efforts that we tried to put in place failed, if you look at it even 17 years on. huge challenges remain in the judiciary of Lagos State in particular, which is the one I'm talking about. Yes, there are still delays in the judicial process. We need more public defenders. We need citizens mediation centers to actually work. And of course, we still need a greater amount of training and discipline. And we still hear of judicial corruption here and there. Perhaps another survey will help to establish where we're at. In other words, actual monitoring, over the 17-year period, especially in this past few years, we don't know whether such monitoring has taken place. But despite all that, and which is really the point that I really would wish to make, although a lot remains to be done years after we left Lagos State, but it's still evident that the administration of justice system in Lagos State is still the gold standard for state judiciaries, because at least at some point, which was in the beginning in 1999, a deliberate, serious-minded effort was made for reform. And since then, several attorneys general have built on it. Another thing I'd like to mention about what has happened with trying to sustain it is that we established a tradition of attorneys general of Lagos State meeting at least once. And I'm happy to say that we at least had 2 or 3 of those meetings with new attorneys general as they came on board, so that we're able to establish to a certain extent a collegiate approach, and we're at least able to share experiences and all that. Sadly I wasn't able to attend the very last one that they did, but there have been those kinds of meetings which obviously are very helpful in sustaining reform. So while we may never become experts, and this is just a general point, at influencing change in society, we have plenty of information and wise guidance in what works and what doesn't work. There are numerous examples and several different scenarios of change made, change that is stalled, and change that fails. Some facts that clearly emerge from all of what we know, and I speak for myself, are the following. The first is that there are no hard and fast rules to influencing change. Influencing change is contextual. There are no hard and fast rules. Second, that because change involves humans, and humans are a notoriously difficult species, change will often be complex and sometimes even ambiguous. The third is that we must learn to live with a measure of ambiguity and uncertainty. We are not sovereign, so we can't be sure, always. But what appears constant about change makers and those who are interested in change anywhere is passion and a never give up spirit. History, as well as experience, provides us with the right lessons and insights to nuance our own peculiar circumstances. Failure in influencing change has often led to despair. People say, oh, we tried, but see what happened. But the peculiarity of change is that failure might actually only be a building block, and it could be a crucial building block. Most changes of real significance are hardly from a one-off activity. They build on the many steps, many errors, and many successes of the past. The reality of bringing about real change is humbling, and anyone who speaks about change in a manner that is less than humble may not have really gone through any kind of rigorous process. While the role of an inspired or inspirational catalyst may be vital, the role of some kind of a change maker, a reformer, might be a vital one, it is hardly possible as a solo effort. Collaboration and synergies are key. Indeed, enduring change almost always requires an intentional or inadvertent development of an ecosystem of like minds. There has to be the creation of that ecosystem of like minds, whatever the change that you want to achieve. Understanding the role that others will play or will play is an important one, and we must be open to diverse roles and players. This is an important lesson. from many successful and failed attempts at change. But perhaps the most frightening thing about change, and I think Mokpe mentioned this, is really that if we do not intentionally and positively seek to influence change, there will be change anyway. Only that the change could be disastrous. Consistently working at change, sometimes against all odds, is probably the only antidote to watching negative change unfold while we fold our arms. This primer on influencing change is an important contribution to the growing body of knowledge on investigating and implementing and managing change. I think it takes on a very huge challenge of explaining those processes in the context of Nigeria, our country, where, as the primer explains, on account of the recursive one step forward and two steps backwards, her change journey has sometimes led to despair. But by unpacking many complexities and ambiguities of the subject, the primer helps our understanding very greatly. But more importantly, it gives us hope. So let me again commend Jude for the hard work and the team, of course, for the hard work that has gone into this primer. It is a testament to his optimistic commitment to moving our nation, of course, our region forward. And I'm equally delighted that Thoughts and Mace Advisory, the firm that he envisioned and that is responsible also for this publication, is firmly committed to providing knowledge and support to third sector institutions to ensure that we create a vibrant ecosystem for Nigeria and for Africa. This primer, as I understand it, is only the first in their primer series. And we look forward to more of these kinds of effort. So before I say thank you very much, I'd like to ask someone, what is a primer? As I see that nobody dares to take on the challenge, thank you very much for listening.